My name is Michael. I'm 54 years old, and I've spent more than half my life building a wall of security around the people I loved, only to realize that I was the one handing my own daughter the tools to tear it down, brick by brick. Imagine for a second that you come back home, that place you paid for with decades of sweat and hard decisions, and you notice an empty space in the garage, a space that shouldn't be there. The luxury car you bought, the one you paid for with an effort she will never understand, is gone. And it wasn't stolen by some stranger on the street. It was taken with a signature, with perfume, and with a confident smile. My own daughter, Emily, sold the vehicle I was still paying for month after month without saying a single word to me. But the worst part wasn't the sale. The worst part was the moment I confronted her, and instead of an apology or even a trace of shame, I received the lowest blow a father can endure. She looked me straight in the eyes, holding a glass of wine I'd also paid for, and called me selfish. She said I was a small, controlling man who used money to suffocate her, and that since the car was in her name, she could do whatever she wanted. In that moment, while she mocked my age and my supposed ignorance of the law, something inside me shut off forever. There were no screams, no drama, just a cold silence. She thought she had won because the title had her name on it, but she forgot one legal detail that I had planted years ago, like someone setting a trap for a predator that doesn't yet know it's hungry. Emily believed she had gotten away with it, but what she didn't know was that in less than 72 hours, her world of arrogance and paper-thin luxury would collapse under the weight of her own ambition. She forgot that I am a man of contracts, not empty words. If you enjoy stories where betrayal has consequences and justice arrives without warning, leave your like and subscribe. Here, we share real stories of revenge and lessons that are never forgotten. I've spent more than 3 decades moving through the world of assets, insurance, and risk management. My life has never been built on instincts, but on calculations. I've always been the kind of man who reads the fine print of a lease before signing it, the one who checks tire pressure before a trip, and the one who, by professional habit, always has a contingency plan for the worst. My wife, Sarah, used to say that I lived in the future, anticipating disasters that would never happen. She was the heart of the house, the warmth that balanced my analytical coldness. But 10 years ago, cancer took her in less than 6 months, and I was left alone with Emily. Emily was our only daughter, the center of my universe. After Sarah's death, my protective instincts spiraled out of control. I made the same mistake many men of my generation make. I thought that if I gave her every material advantage, if I removed every obstacle from her path, she would be happy and, above all, safe. I paid for the best private university, a degree in marketing that she chose more for status than for passion. She never lacked anything. While I spent 14 hours a day in the office analyzing insurance claims and corporate bankruptcy reports, she lived inside a bubble of comfort financed by my lost hours of sleep. When she graduated, Emily didn't look for a job with humility. She wanted to start at the top. She said her personal brand was too valuable for entry-level positions. To support her, and maybe to fill the void her mother left, I decided to buy her that car. It wasn't just any vehicle. It was a luxury sedan, ash gray, with an engine that roared with restrained elegance and an interior that smelled like success and fine leather. It cost me a fortune, but in my mind, it was an investment in her safety and her professional image. However, my risk management mindset never rests. The day of the purchase at the dealership, while she was taking pictures for social media next to the shiny hood, I was speaking with the legal representative. The vehicle was registered under her name, so she could start building her own credit history, but I was listed as the sole payer and guarantor. And this is where I introduced the key piece, a title retention clause in my favor. In simple terms, even though her name was on the registration, the legal ownership would not be fully transferred until the final payment was completed by the registered payer. She signed the documents laughing without reading a single line, calling me an overprotective dad. I simply stored the original contract in my safe, hoping I would never have to use it. As the months passed, The car changed Emily. It became the center of her identity. She started surrounding herself with people who only talked about cryptocurrency investments, private beach trips, and appearances. Her attitude toward me became condescending. She was no longer the daughter who asked for advice. She was a woman who saw me as an outdated ATM. "Dad, you don't understand how the world works now," she would say every time I tried to talk to her about the importance of real savings or family loyalty. I noticed that Emily began lying to me about small things. She would ask for extra money for the car's maintenance that I already knew was covered, or tell me she had work meetings that turned out to be yacht parties with people she barely knew. I could see her moral compass shifting, but I stayed silent. My mistake was believing that my generosity would buy her gratitude. In reality, my generosity only fed her contempt. To her, my effort wasn't a sacrifice. It was an obligation. She felt entitled to receive everything without giving anything in return. The atmosphere at our weekly dinners became unbearable. She spent the entire time glued to her phone, ignoring my questions about her life. The car, that symbol of status I had given her, became the vehicle of her distance. She felt powerful behind the wheel of something she couldn't afford, and that false sense of power led her to believe I was disposable. The emotional balance between us was stretched to its limit. I was the pillar supporting her lifestyle, and she was the parasite despising the host. What I didn't know was that the balance was about to break in the most vile way imaginable. She was already planning how to monetize my last act of affection, without realizing that every step she took toward her supposed financial freedom was bringing her closer to a legal abyss she wouldn't be able to escape with just a smile. The breaking point didn't come with a scream, but with a silence that sank deep into my bones. It was the day of her 27th birthday. I had bought her a wristwatch, a classic piece, one of those that doesn't scream wealth but that any connoisseur respects, to give her at her apartment. When I arrived, the first thing I noticed was the absence. The spot where that ash-gray sedan always sat in the garage was empty. I thought she had gone out, but something in my instinct, that radar I've sharpened over decades in the insurance world, sent me a warning signal. The floor of the parking space was too clean, as if no one had parked there in days. I took the elevator up with a strange weight in my stomach. When I stepped into her living room, I found her drinking wine with an air of triumph I couldn't immediately understand. Emily didn't greet me with affection. She looked at me the way you look at an annoying bill collector who shows up at the worst possible time. When I asked her where the car was, she set her glass down on the glass table with a sharp knock. "I sold it, Dad," she said without hesitation, with a calmness that knocked the air out of me. Someone from my investment group was looking for that exact model. He offered me a great cash deal, and we closed it 3 days ago. I stood there, in the middle of her living room filled with furniture I had also helped pay for, feeling the ground shift beneath my feet. I reminded her, with the calmest voice I could gather, that the car wasn't paid off yet, that I was still sending the monthly payment to the finance company so she wouldn't have any debt. Her reaction was what finally broke the last thread of my fatherly heart. She stood up, crossed her arms, and let out a laugh, filled with a kind of venom I never thought she had in her. "That's your problem, not mine. The car was in my name. The paperwork said Emily. If you decided to be the one paying for it, that's a gift, and gifts aren't returned or questioned." The injustice wasn't just about the money. It was the humiliation of watching years of my effort treated like disposable trash. I explained to her that selling an asset that still has an active loan is, at the very least, a serious ethical failure, and legally, a dangerous gray area. But Emily wasn't listening anymore. She was intoxicated by her own arrogance. She called me a controlling old man and selfish. She shouted that I only wanted to use the car to keep her tied to my Sunday visits and to my unsolicited advice. "I already have the money in my account," she bragged, "and I've already invested it in a project that will give me the freedom you never wanted me to have. So stop crying over a piece of metal and get out of my house. I'm expecting important people." I felt a sharp pain in my chest, but it wasn't a heart attack. It was the death of respect. She threw me out of her apartment as if I were a stranger, an inconvenience in her new life as a successful entrepreneur. As I went down the elevator, I remembered every extra hour, every stressful audit, and every sacrifice I made so she would never know what it meant to struggle. She thought she had beaten me. She believed my silence as I walked out was a sign of defeat, that I accepted her superiority. What she didn't understand was that I wasn't defeated. I was processing data. The next morning, the pain had turned into method. I didn't turn on the TV or look for distractions. I sat at my desk with a cup of black coffee and the original contract in front of me. I read it 3 times, savoring every technical term, every comma, every signature. Emily thought the law was a matter of opinions or whoever shouted the loudest, but I knew the law is an architecture of precision. I called Daniel, my trusted attorney for over 20 years. Daniel is not a man of emotional speeches. He is a surgeon of the law. When I explained the situation, there was a long silence on the other end of the line, followed by a sigh that blended pity with professional coldness. "Michael, your daughter hasn't just betrayed you," Daniel said in a low, serious voice. "She has committed the unlawful sale of property that wasn't hers to transfer. Because there is a title retention clause in your favor as the payer and guarantor, she had no legal authority to transfer ownership. The sales contract she signed with that third party is legally void. But what's worse for her is that by receiving money for something she had no right to sell, she has entered the territory of fraud." In that moment, I felt the balance begin to shift. My plan didn't come from impulsive anger, but from the need to restore order. I didn't want her back. I wanted my dignity back. The first step of my reconstruction was total financial disconnection. I called the bank and canceled the additional credit card she used for her business expenses. I informed the car financing company that the asset had been unlawfully taken and sold, requesting the immediate suspension of payments from my account and the initiation of asset recovery procedures. I knew this would affect my credit temporarily, but it was a necessary sacrifice to expose her. Without my flow of money, Emily was like a high-rise building built on sand. It only needed the first gust of reality to collapse. Then we moved to the legal offensive. I didn't send her a warning message. Warnings only give the guilty time to hide evidence. I let 48 hours pass so she could feel secure in her victory. Meanwhile, Daniel and I drafted a legal notice directed not only at her, but also at the buyer of the vehicle. The buyer turned out to be a young heir, someone with more connections than common sense, the kind of person who hates legal trouble and values reputation above all else. We made it clear that he was in possession of a vehicle under immobilization order, and that if he didn't cooperate, he would be included in the lawsuit for possession of disputed property. I remember walking through my empty house, feeling a loneliness that no longer weighed on me. I also took the time to review the documents of the apartment where she lived. I was a co-signer on the lease and the only one paying the monthly security deposit. I went to the building's management office. I explained with professional calm that I was withdrawing my financial support due to a drastic change in my economic situation. I warned them that the next payment would not come from my account, and that, according to the contract, the absence of a reliable guarantor was grounds for immediate termination. I was cutting every cable that kept her afloat, one by one, with the precision of a bomb technician. My ally, the private investigator I hired, sent me photos of Emily at a party that very night. She looked radiant, laughing with people dressed in expensive clothes and drinking champagne likely paid for with the money from the car sale. Seeing those photos didn't make me angry. It gave me patience. Patience is a virtue cultivated with age, and I had plenty of it. I was building an invisible net around her life. Every time she posted a story on social media showing off her success, I added another document to the file Daniel was preparing. The legal detail was my anchor. A title retention clause is unforgiving. Until the last cent leaves the registered payer's account, the asset still belongs to the guarantor's estate. Emily believed that physical possession was the same as legal ownership, a beginner's mistake that would cost her everything she thought she had. I spent the last days of that week in a state of deep introspection. I wasn't looking for reconciliation, because you can't reconcile with someone who has no sense of accountability. I was preparing for the final act, the moment when the law would stop being an abstract concept on paper and become the hammer that would strike her reality. Rational revenge is silent, it is methodical, and above all, it is just. I was ready for her to discover that her freedom was, in fact, an unpayable debt to reality. The moment of truth didn't arrive with an explosion, but with the metallic sound of reality knocking at her door. It was 10 in the morning on a Tuesday when I received a text message from Daniel. The repossession has been executed. The car is in custody. I poured myself a coffee, sat down in my leather chair, and waited. I knew the countdown of her desperation had begun. It didn't even take 2 hours before Emily burst into my house. She didn't use her key because I had already changed the locks the day before. She pounded on the door with a violence that revealed her complete loss of control. When I opened it, I didn't see the sophisticated, successful woman she pretended to be. I saw a frightened, furious child drowning in her own web of lies. She walked in screaming, her face red and her eyes burning with rage. "What did you do, Dad?" "The police took the car in the middle of a meeting with my partners. You made me look like a joke in front of everyone. The buyer says I scammed him and he's going to sue me." She paced around my living room like a caged animal, throwing accusations, calling me a traitor, saying I was destroying her professional career over a simple paperwork misunderstanding. I remained standing, silent, observing her with analytical coldness, like someone watching a laboratory experiment reach its logical conclusion. I didn't interrupt her outburst. I let her release all the poison, exhaust her empty arguments about selfishness and control. When she finally stopped to catch her breath, I placed a blue folder on the table. It contained the original contract with the title Retention Clause highlighted in fluorescent yellow, along with the notice terminating her lease and the cancellation of her credit card. "I'm not the one who destroyed you, Emily," I said in a voice so low and firm that it made her take a step back. "You destroyed yourself the moment you decided my sacrifice was a weakness you could monetize. You sold something that wasn't yours. You deceived a third party. And worst of all, you thought I would keep paying for the privilege of being humiliated by my own daughter." Her expression shifted from rage to pure panic as she read the documents. She realized she hadn't just lost the car, she was losing her home, her credit, and her freedom. "But Dad, I don't have the money to pay it back," she stammered, and for the first time in years I saw a crack of honesty in her facade. "I spent it all on the investment, and on some things I needed." I smiled with bitter irony. Those things she needed were designer bags and dinners I never allowed myself, so she could have a future. I explained that the buyer had already filed a criminal complaint for fraud and that the financing company was proceeding against her for unlawful appropriation. "Fix it, please," she begged, trying to use the same voice she used as a child when she broke something valuable. "You have the connections. You know the lawyers. Pay the debt, and I'll give it back to you later." I stepped closer to her, enough for her to feel the coldness of my resolve. "There is no later, Emily. I am no longer your guarantor, your bank, or your safety net. The legal detail you forgot is that trust is like a contract. Once one party commits a fundamental breach, the agreement is permanently void. Tomorrow, the building manager will change the locks on your apartment. You have the rest of the day to pack your things into cardboard boxes, or better yet, use those expensive bags you bought to carry your belongings." The impact of my words was devastating. She collapsed onto the couch, crying in short, broken sobs, realizing that her usual manipulations didn't work on a man who no longer felt anything for her except deep disappointment. I watched her there, defeated by her own greed, and I felt no pleasure. But I did feel a technical satisfaction, the same one an architect feels when the structural calculations prove correct. The system she tried to outsmart was swallowing her whole. I asked her to leave. When she walked out the door, dragging her feet and staring into nothing, I knew justice had been done. She thought I was an old man who could be discarded. She discovered that I am the man who knows the exact value of every cent and every betrayal. The climax wasn't a battle. It was a moral eviction. 6 months have passed since I closed the door of my life behind Emily's defeated figure. Many would expect that with time, a father's heart would soften, or that nostalgia would erase the damage. But reality is sober and stripped of sentimentality. Emily couldn't return the money from the car, and the buyer pursued the fraud case to its full extent. She had to liquidate every one of her indulgences, selling her jewelry and designer furniture to avoid a prison sentence. She lost her luxury apartment and now lives in a rented room in an area she once despised, working mediocre jobs to pay off a debt she created out of pure arrogance. I haven't spoken to her again. Some relatives tried to intervene with clichés about forgiveness, saying that blood is thicker than water. I respond to all of them with the same cold logic I use to analyze a policy. Forgiveness requires accountability, and Emily only feels sorry for the consequences, not for her betrayal. You don't rebuild a bridge with someone who tried to set it on fire while you were still crossing it. She didn't just sell a car, she sold my trust and the last trace of respect I had for her. I've learned that true maturity comes when you understand that love is not a blank check for disrespect. My life now is quiet. Even though the absence of a daughter hurts, I prefer that absence over the constant humiliation of being seen as a tool. I got rid of the gray sedan once it was recovered. I didn't want a metal reminder of betrayal sitting in my garage. Walking through my house now brings me peace. Children are not always a reflection of their parents, but the result of their own choices. I gave her the tools to build a life, and she used them to try to dig my financial grave. Now that the dust has settled, I feel no guilt. I feel the satisfaction of a lesson well delivered. Life doesn't have movie-style happy endings where everyone hugs it out. In the real world, actions have legal consequences, and debts are collected with interest. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's watching life collect what it's owed. If this story felt as intense to you as it was for me to live it, leave your like and tell me in the comments what you would have done. And if you're not subscribed yet, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next stories.